Every truth has two sides, but here we dig deeper. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we unravel the secrets that change everything. Cedarbrook was one of those suburban neighborhoods where appearances mattered more than anything else. Perfectly trimmed hedges, matching mailboxes, freshly painted shutters. It was the kind of place where people measured worth not by kindness, but by curb appeal. Amidst the carefully manicured lawns and SUVs polished every Sunday morning, there lived Linda Carter. Linda was a woman in her late 50s, with silver strands woven into her chestnut hair and eyes that always seemed to carry a quiet depth. To most of her neighbors, she was simply that woman who lives alone in the little blue house at the end of the street. She didn't host summer barbecues, didn't belong to the book club, and certainly didn't shop at the trendy boutique where the neighborhood wives flocked every weekend. She lived simply, some would say too simply, and in a community obsessed with status that made her invisible. But it wasn't just invisibility, it was dismissal. People didn't just ignore Linda, they judged her. When she walked by on her evening strolls, carrying a small tote bag filled with books from the library, the younger mothers whispered, "Poor thing, she must be lonely," one would murmur, sipping her iced latte. "She could at least try to take care of her house," another would add. Her home, while tidy, didn't boast the lavish upgrades others flaunted. No sprawling deck, no outdoor kitchen, no remodeled facade. Just a modest blue house with a white picket fence, slightly faded by time. To Linda, it was more than enough. But to her neighbors, it was a blemish in their otherwise polished community. The Hendersons in particular made sure Linda knew where she stood. The Henderson family was everything Linda was not. Outspoken, wealthy, and proud of it. Gregory Henderson ran a successful construction company, while his wife, Sandra, prided herself on her designer wardrobe and hosting extravagant parties. Their two children, teenage twins Chloe and Ethan, had grown up accustomed to sneering at those beneath them. At neighborhood gatherings, the Hendersons were the center of attention. And Linda? She was the afterthought. If she spoke, her words were often interrupted or brushed aside. If she offered to help, someone else quickly filled the role, as if her presence was an inconvenience. One summer afternoon, as Linda returned from the grocery store with her modest bags of vegetables and bread, she overheard the Henderson children laughing in their driveway. "Look, there's the maid," Ethan joked, nudging his sister. "Carrying bags like some kind of servant," Chloe giggled. "Probably bought all that with coupons. Can't imagine living like that." Linda heard them, of course. Her steps faltered for just a moment, but she kept walking. She had learned long ago that dignity didn't require defending oneself against every careless remark. Still, inside, a familiar ache pulsed. She had grown used to being underestimated, yet it never stopped stinging. And it wasn't just the Hendersons. At block parties, when neighbors gathered around tables of catered food, Linda was the one seated at the far edge, rarely included in conversation. At Christmas, when lights glittered across rooftops, the Hendersons' mansion-like home blazed brightest, while Linda's modest string of lights seemed almost invisible in comparison. But Linda didn't mind the quiet. She lived with intention. She spent her mornings tending to her small garden, afternoons volunteering at the local library, and evenings lost in books or long walks beneath the stars. She had lived through storms far harsher than neighborhood gossip, and solitude had become her companion rather than her burden. Still, in Cedarbrook, kindness was often mistaken for weakness, and Linda's silence only gave her neighbors more reasons to dismiss her. One chilly autumn evening, Sandra Henderson hosted a dinner party. The neighborhood elite gathered, laughter spilling out onto the street as cars lined the driveway. Linda, walking by on her evening stroll, caught a glimpse of the glittering lights and the silhouettes of people inside. She wasn't invited, of course. She never was. Sandra, noticing Linda pass by, smirked to her guests. "There goes our local recluse. Sweet woman, but really, she's not quite one of us." The room chuckled, glasses clinking in agreement. Inside her little blue house, Linda poured herself a cup of tea, sitting by the window where faint strains of music from the Hendersons' party floated across the night. She didn't resent them, not really. She just wished people could see beyond the surface, that worth wasn't measured by square footage or designer labels. But that was Cedarbrook, and Linda had learned to live quietly on the margins. What no one knew, not Sandra, not Gregory, not any of the neighbors who whispered behind their manicured hedges, was that Linda carried a past hidden in plain sight, a past that had shaped her into more than the lonely woman at the end of the street. And soon, when the Hendersons' carefully constructed world began to crumble, it would be Linda, the woman they ignored, the woman they mocked, who would hold the key to saving them. But in this moment, in the golden glow of street lamps and autumn leaves, she was simply invisible. Just Linda, just the overlooked neighbor. They had no idea that the balance of power in Cedarbrook was about to change forever. The Hendersons' struggle. The Hendersons had built their reputation in Cedarbrook on confidence, sometimes bordering on arrogance. To the outside world, Gregory Henderson was a success story, a self-made man who had turned a small construction company into one of the most recognizable firms in the county. His wife, Sandra, was the embodiment of suburban prestige, often photographed at charity galas and known for hosting dinners that looked like pages from glossy magazines. Their children, Chloe and Ethan, wore designer clothes and drove cars most teenagers could only dream of. It all looked perfect. Too perfect. Behind the glossy facade, cracks had begun to form. Gregory's construction company, Henderson Builders, had been stretched thin by several risky projects. He borrowed heavily to expand into commercial developments, chasing prestige contracts he hoped would make him a household name. But costs spiraled, deals fell through, and soon the company was drowning in debt. Gregory tried to hide it, telling Sandra that things were just tight for now, but the truth was far more dangerous. Creditors were circling, banks were calling, and the once stable fortune of the Henderson family was on the brink of collapse. Sandra began to notice changes. The expensive wine was replaced with cheaper bottles. Gregory was often on the phone late into the night, his voice tense, his words clipped. He snapped at her more often, at Chloe and Ethan too. The warmth of their golden home began to fade, replaced by something colder. Fear. It all came crashing down one Tuesday morning. Sandra was arranging fresh flowers in their grand foyer when a man in a gray suit knocked at the door. His tone was professional but firm. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, handing her a thick envelope. "This is notice from the bank. The mortgage on this property is in arrears. Unless payment is made, foreclosure proceedings will begin." Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. Numbers stared back at her. Numbers so large she couldn't comprehend how Gregory had let things go this far. Her perfect world blurred. She slammed the door, her heart pounding. When Gregory came home that evening, she confronted him, the letter shaking in her hands. "How could you let this happen? How could you risk everything?" Gregory dropped his briefcase, exhaustion etched into his face. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I don't feel the weight of it? The deals were supposed to close, Sandra. We were supposed to be secure. I just miscalculated." Miscalculated? Sandra's voice cracked. "We could lose the house, Greg. The house? Do you know what people will say?" But it wasn't just the house. It was their entire image. The Hendersons weren't just wealthy. They were the wealthy family of Cedarbrook. To admit failure, to face foreclosure, was to admit that the empire they had so proudly flaunted was nothing more than a house of cards. News travels fast in neighborhoods like Cedarbrook. Whispers began even before Sandra could compose herself. At the weekly book club, she noticed the sidelong glances, the hushed conversations that fell silent when she entered the room. Someone had seen the envelope delivered. Someone had talked. "Do you think it's true?" one neighbor whispered. "I heard the company's in trouble. It wouldn't surprise me," another replied. The Henderson children, too, weren't immune. Chloe's friends at school teased her. "Guess Daddy's not as rich as he pretends, huh?" Ethan, usually brash, withdrew in embarrassment, refusing to invite anyone over. For the first time in their charmed lives, the Hendersons felt something they had always believed was reserved for people like Linda Carter: shame. Sandra tried calling friends for help, women she had hosted at lavish dinners, couples who had toasted champagne in her home, but excuses piled up. "We'd love to help, but things are tight this year." "So sorry, Sandra, we can't get involved." The truth was simpler. People were distancing themselves from the Hendersons before the fall became official. Even family members offered little support. Gregory's brother, once eager to partner in business, declined his calls. Sandra's sister, who had borrowed money from them in the past, now claimed she couldn't afford to return the favor. Every door closed. Every lifeline disappeared. By late autumn, desperation had settled in. Gregory spent hours at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere, loan documents, balance sheets, contracts that had failed. Sandra paced the house, her once glamorous demeanor replaced by worry lines and sleepless eyes. Chloe and Ethan fought constantly, their voices echoing through halls that now felt cavernous and hollow. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Sandra whispered the words neither of them had dared say aloud. "What if we can't fix this?" Gregory didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said it all. Their once proud home, the jewel of Cedar Brook, was now at risk of being stripped from them. For the Hendersons, who had always prided themselves on their status, the prospect was unbearable. They were losing more than a house. They were losing their identity. And yet, as they stumbled under the weight of their pride and their debts, they didn't realize that help was closer than they thought, that the very neighbor they had dismissed, mocked, and ignored would soon hold the key to their salvation. But in those moments of despair, all the Hendersons saw was darkness. They were too proud to imagine that salvation could come from the little blue house at the end of the street. Linda's unexpected kindness. Linda Carter had lived at the edge of Cedar Brook for nearly 2 decades, but to most of her neighbors, she was invisible. Her small, weathered blue house stood in stark contrast to the sprawling brick mansions that lined the cul-de-sac. The Hendersons, in particular, had always looked past her as if she were part of the scenery, someone beneath their notice. She didn't host glamorous parties. She didn't drive luxury cars. She worked quietly as a nurse's aide at the county clinic, a job that was neither glamorous nor lucrative, but one she did with diligence and care. To many in Cedar Brook, Linda was just the woman in scrubs, someone they barely acknowledged when passing her in the grocery store. But Linda noticed things. She noticed the overgrown lawn at the Henderson estate when their landscapers stopped coming. She noticed Sandra's rushed, distracted movements, the dark circles under her eyes. She noticed Gregory pacing late into the night, his silhouette visible through the lit office window. And she noticed the children, once full of swagger, now retreating, carrying the heavy burden of a family secret. Linda wasn't one to gossip. She had heard the whispers in town, the rumors of foreclosure, of mounting debt. But she didn't repeat them. She simply filed them away, her heart aching in quiet empathy. She knew what it was like to struggle, to feel the walls closing in. Life had handed her many trials, the death of her husband, raising her son alone, scraping by paycheck to paycheck. She had endured storms that would have crushed others, and though she bore the scars, she also carried resilience. One chilly November evening, Linda was coming home from a late shift when she saw Sandra outside, standing by her mailbox. Sandra's perfect hair was undone, her elegant sweater hanging loosely. She clutched a letter in her hand, her eyes glassy. "Evening, Sandra," Linda said gently. Sandra flinched, quickly trying to mask her distress. "Oh, hello, Linda." Her voice wavered, but she forced a polite smile. "Just getting the mail." Linda hesitated. She could have walked on. She could have let pride build its wall, as so many in Cedar Brook had done. But instead, she said softly, "It's hard, isn't it, when the weight of it all feels too much?" Sandra blinked. For a moment, her guard slipped. Her lips trembled. I don't know what you mean." Linda tilted her head, offering a kind, knowing smile. "You don't have to explain. I just want you to know, you're not as alone as you think." It was such a simple gesture, so unlike the polished sympathy Sandra was used to at galas and country clubs. This was raw, real, and unexpectedly disarming. Sandra, too proud to admit her fears, muttered a quick thank you and retreated inside. But Linda's words lingered. Over the next week, Linda found small ways to show kindness. She baked an extra loaf of bread and left it at the Hendersons' door with a note. "For your family. Wishing you warmth this week. Linda." She shoveled snow from their driveway one icy morning before Gregory could. She offered to drive Chloe home from school when her car wouldn't start. At first, the Hendersons resisted. Pride is a stubborn thing, especially when it's been polished for years in the shine of status. Gregory muttered about not needing charity. Sandra rolled her eyes at small-town gestures. Chloe and Ethan were embarrassed to be seen accepting help from the nurse aide down the street. But little by little, Linda's persistence chipped away at the walls they had built. One particularly cold night, when Sandra returned home to find another foreclosure notice taped to the door, she broke down completely. Sitting on her marble floor, sobbing, she felt the house, her symbol of perfection, become a prison. In desperation, she thought of Linda. That evening, she found herself standing in front of the little blue house, hesitant, her breath fogging in the air. Linda answered the door in her scrubs, her hair pulled back, exhaustion in her eyes. But when she saw Sandra, she smiled warmly. "Come in, sit down. You look like you need tea." And just like that, the dam broke. Sandra confessed everything: Gregory's failing company, the debts, the foreclosure notices, the fear of losing everything. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered, something she had never dared to share with her high society friends. Linda listened without judgment, her steady presence like an anchor in a storm. When Sandra finally stopped, breathless and ashamed, Linda said simply, "You are not your house. You are not your fortune. And this burden, it doesn't have to break you." Sandra's eyes filled again, but this time with something different. Not shame, not fear, but the first flicker of hope. From that night on, Linda became more than a neighbor. She became a lifeline. She offered practical advice, drawing from her years of stretching every dollar. She introduced Sandra to a financial counselor at the clinic who specialized in helping families in crisis. She helped Chloe and Ethan with schoolwork, reminding them that worth wasn't measured in cars or clothes. And most importantly, she reminded the Hendersons of something they had forgotten: humanity. For a family that had built their lives on appearances, it was a humbling lesson. But it was also the beginning of transformation. Because Linda Carter, the neighbor they had ignored for years, was about to do something none of them could have imagined. She was going to save their home. The Hendersons had been living on a fragile thread of denial, weaving excuses and half-truths to keep up appearances. For months, they told their friends they were renovating when landscapers stopped showing up. They claimed Gregory was scaling new ventures when his company's offices closed. They even avoided neighborhood gatherings, inventing reasons to dodge the curious glances and whispered questions. But the thread could only hold so long before it snapped. And when it did, the unraveling was swift and brutal. It began on a gray Thursday morning, when Gregory opened the mailbox and pulled out the thick envelope stamped with red ink. Final notice: foreclosure proceedings initiated. His hands trembled as he read the words, the kind that turned his proud mansion into a ticking time bomb. Sandra, standing behind him, gasped. "Gregory, no, tell me this isn't real." He tried to swallow his pride, but his voice cracked. "It's real. They've given us 30 days. After that, the bank takes the house." The words echoed through the marble foyer, bouncing off the grand staircase, the glittering chandelier, the polished floors, all symbols of wealth now slipping like sand through their fingers. Chloe, overhearing from the stairs, whispered, "We're losing our home?" Ethan, his younger brother, looked up with wide, fearful eyes. The Hendersons had always been a family of appearances, but at that moment, the masks fell. Sandra broke into sobs. Chloe slammed her door in anger. Ethan clung to his father's arm. And Gregory, once the image of authority, looked utterly defeated. For the first time, the Henderson family stood naked before the truth. They were on the brink of losing everything. That evening, Linda saw the Hendersons' lights burning late into the night. She considered walking past, pretending not to notice, as they once had done to her. But something urged her forward. She knocked softly. Sandra opened the door, her face streaked with tears. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She simply whispered, "They're taking the house." Linda stepped inside, her warm presence filling the hollow silence. She listened as Gregory admitted the full extent of their financial ruin. Debts piled high, his company bankrupt, no savings left. Sandra collapsed onto the couch. We built our lives on this house, Linda. It's our pride, our legacy. Without it, who are we? Linda leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. Sandra, a house is walls and bricks. It's people who make a home. But I'll be honest, losing this place will hurt, and it'll take strength to get through. You can't do it alone. You need help. Gregory's jaw tightened. Help? We don't need handouts. Linda met his eyes, unflinching. This isn't about pride, Gregory. Pride won't save your family. You've been trying to fight this alone, but it's time to face the truth. You need others to stand with you. Her words hit harder than any bank notice. For Gregory, admitting weakness was unbearable. But in Sandra's tearful eyes, there was something else. Relief. Someone was finally saying aloud what she had felt for months, that they couldn't carry this weight by themselves. The next week was a whirlwind of emotions. Sandra confided in a close friend, only to be met with thinly veiled judgment. I thought you two had it all together. What happened? Word spread quickly through Cedarbrook. Neighbors who once envied the Hendersons now whispered about their downfall with smug satisfaction. Chloe faced cruel taunts at school. Guess your mansion isn't so big anymore, huh? Ethan withdrew, embarrassed to invite friends over. The walls of their fortress felt more like prison bars, each room echoing with shame. Gregory grew more irritable, snapping at his family, burying himself in failed attempts to salvage his company. Sandra felt herself slipping into despair, drowning in what-ifs. And then came the breaking point. It was a Saturday afternoon when two men in suits arrived at the Henderson mansion. They weren't there for pleasantries. They were representatives of the bank, armed with paperwork and deadlines. Gregory tried to stand tall, but his voice wavered as he argued for more time. 30 days isn't enough. We can work something out. There has to be a way. The men shook their heads. Unless you come up with the payment in full, sir, this property will be seized. Sandra stood frozen in the doorway, her children watching from the stairs, their young faces pale with fear. For all their wealth, for all their pride, the Hendersons were powerless. The house, the symbol of their status, was slipping away. And just as the men left, Linda appeared at the edge of the driveway. She had seen it all. Sandra, broken and humiliated, whispered, "Linda, we don't know what to do." Linda stepped closer, her voice calm yet resolute. "Then it's time you let me help." There was no arrogance in her tone, no pity, just strength, quiet and steady, the strength of someone who had weathered storms and survived. Sandra looked at her, stunned. Gregory clenched his fists, torn between pride and desperation. Chloe and Ethan leaned forward, silently begging for someone to fix what their parents could not. And in that moment, when the Hendersons had hit rock bottom, the neighbor they had ignored for years became their only lifeline. Because Linda Carter wasn't just offering kindness anymore. She was preparing to fight for them. The days following the foreclosure notice felt like living under a shadow that grew darker with each passing hour. The Hendersons moved through their once grand home like ghosts, their laughter gone, replaced by the constant hum of fear and whispered arguments. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a countdown clock. But Linda Carter, the neighbor they had once dismissed, refused to let that shadow consume them. She had known hardship. Years ago, when her husband walked out and left her with 2 children and a mountain of debt, she had faced eviction herself. She remembered the cold terror of foreclosure letters, the sleepless nights of wondering how to feed her kids, the humiliation of asking for help. She had survived not because of pride, but because of people who extended a hand when she was drowning. Now she knew it was her turn to extend that hand. On a quiet Sunday morning, Linda knocked again on the Hendersons' door. Gregory answered, his tie loosened, his face unshaven. Pride still lingered in his posture, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "Linda," he said stiffly, "I appreciate your concern, but there's nothing you can do. This is our mess to deal with." Linda didn't flinch. She walked past him into the foyer, where Sandra sat on the couch with a cup of untouched coffee, and the children lingered nearby. "I'm not here to pity you," Linda said firmly. "I'm here with a plan." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "A plan?" "Yes," Linda replied, "but it requires something you haven't done in a long time, trusting someone else." Sandra leaned forward, desperate. What plan? Linda pulled out a folder from her bag and laid it on the coffee table. Inside were contacts, financial counseling programs, and even local nonprofits that specialized in helping families facing foreclosure. I've made calls, she explained. There are people who can negotiate with the bank on your behalf. There are lawyers willing to look at your case. You don't have to go through this alone. Gregory frowned. Lawyers? Nonprofits? Sandra, this is charity. Sandra's voice broke. Gregory, stop. We're drowning, and you're worried about pride? Look at our children. Look at what this is doing to them. If Linda has a way forward, we have to try. For the first time, Gregory fell silent. His shoulders sagged. The image of control he had clung to for so long crumbled in front of his family. And that was the turning point. The moment pride gave way to desperation, and desperation gave way to trust. Over the next week, Linda guided the Hendersons through uncharted waters. She introduced them to a financial counselor who dissected their debts and created a plan. She connected them with an attorney who discovered flaws in the foreclosure filing that could buy them time. Most importantly, Linda became a constant presence, a steady voice reminding them that they were not alone. For Sandra, it was like breathing again after months of suffocation. She found herself talking to Linda late into the night, not just about bills and legal strategies, but about her fears, her regrets, and her dreams. For the first time, she felt truly seen. For Chloe and Ethan, Linda became a safe space. Chloe confided in her about the bullying at school. Ethan found comfort in Linda's stories of resilience, realizing that strength wasn't about never falling but about getting back up again. Even Gregory, though reluctant at first, began to soften. One evening, as they sat reviewing documents, he admitted quietly, I should have seen this coming. I thought I could handle it alone. I didn't want to admit to anyone, not even Sandra, that I failed. Linda placed a hand on the papers between them. Gregory, failure isn't falling. It's refusing to get back up. You still have a chance to stand tall, for your family, but you can't do it alone. For the first time in months, Gregory nodded, not in defiance, but in acceptance. As word spread through Cedarbrook about the Hendersons' troubles, the gossip mill churned faster. Some neighbors smirked at their downfall. Others expressed shallow sympathy. But a surprising shift also began. When people saw Linda standing by their side, walking with Sandra to meetings, picking up the children from school, even speaking on their behalf at the bank, something changed. The Hendersons, once symbols of arrogance and isolation, began to look human, vulnerable. And Linda, once overlooked and dismissed, became their anchor. The real test came 2 weeks later, when Gregory and Sandra sat across from the bank's representatives. The atmosphere was tense, every word heavy with consequence. The bank was prepared to proceed, but Linda's attorney pointed out discrepancies in the paperwork, questioning whether the foreclosure could legally move forward. For hours, arguments volleyed back and forth. Sandra's hands trembled under the table. Gregory's jaw was set like stone. The children waited at home, praying their parents would return with good news. Finally, the lead representative sighed. We'll grant an extension, 60 days, but you'll need to present a feasible repayment plan, or the process resumes. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was hope. A lifeline. Sandra burst into tears of relief. Gregory exhaled, his shoulders slumping, as if the weight of the world had eased, if only slightly. And when they stepped outside the sterile bank building, Linda was there waiting. Sandra embraced her tightly, whispering, "We couldn't have done this without you." Linda smiled softly. "You're not done yet, but you're not alone anymore." That night, as the Hendersons gathered for dinner around their massive dining table, something felt different. For the first time in months, they weren't consumed by silence or bitterness. Sandra lit candles. Chloe laughed at Ethan's silly jokes. Gregory, though weary, actually smiled. It wasn't just a meal. It was the spark of something they had nearly lost. Unity. The Hendersons were still facing battles, financial, emotional, and social. But they had reached the turning point, the moment when despair gave way to resilience. And it had all begun with the neighbor they had ignored. The 60 days the bank had granted the Hendersons moved like sand through an hourglass, every moment slipping away too quickly, every second tinged with pressure. While Linda had bought them time, the Hendersons knew their reprieve was fragile, but what none of them realized was that the real battle wasn't just against debt or foreclosure. It was against secrets, dark, hidden truths that threatened to destroy them from within. It started with a quiet knock at Linda's door late one evening. Sandra stood there, pale and trembling, clutching a manila envelope. "I found this while sorting through Gregory's office," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do with it." Linda ushered her inside. Sandra set the envelope on the table, sliding out a stack of papers, bank statements, credit card bills, and letters. Linda scanned them carefully. The numbers were staggering. Gregory had been hiding debts far greater than anyone knew. Private loans, risky investments, even gambling withdrawals from online accounts. It wasn't just the economy or bad luck. Gregory's pride and his secrets had pushed them to the edge. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. All this time, he told me it was the market, the business deals that fell through. But this? How could he lie to us? Linda placed a steadying hand on hers. "Sandra, you deserve the truth. But this is more than betrayal. It is a chance to understand what you are really up against. Secrets destroy families. Bringing them into the light is the only way forward." The next night, Linda suggested a family meeting. Gregory resisted at first, muttering excuses, but Sandra's resolve was unshakable. At the long dining table, under the soft glow of the chandelier, the Henderson family gathered. Chloe and Ethan sat silently, sensing the weight in the air. Sandra slid the envelope across to Gregory. "Explain this," she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Gregory's face drained of color. His fingers hovered over the papers before pulling them back as if burned. "You went through my office?" "This isn't about privacy," Sandra snapped. "This is about survival, about our children's future. You've been lying to us, Gregory, to me." For the first time in years, Gregory had no sharp retort, no commanding speech. His mask cracked. He looked at his children's wide, confused eyes, at his wife's trembling fury, and at Linda, calm, steady, unyielding. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "I thought I could fix it. I didn't want you to see me as weak. I made bad decisions, loans, bets. When the company started slipping, I thought one win, one good deal would make it right. But instead, I buried us deeper." The silence was suffocating. Chloe's voice broke it, barely above a whisper. "Dad, were we going to lose the house because of you?" Gregory's chest tightened. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Yes." Ethan burst into tears. Sandra held him, but her eyes never left Gregory's. "You didn't just risk our house. You risked our family. And for what? Pride?" Gregory's shoulders sagged. "I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to admit I failed you." Linda leaned forward, her voice firm but compassionate. "Gregory, failing isn't the end. Hiding the truth is. But now it's out. And now, finally, you can start to rebuild. Not with lies, but with honesty." In the days that followed, something shifted. For the first time, Gregory stopped trying to control everything. He sat with Sandra and the counselor Linda had introduced, confessing every detail of his hidden debts. It was humiliating, but it was real. Sandra, though furious, felt a strange relief. She wasn't fighting an invisible enemy anymore. She could see the truth, and that meant she could decide how to face it. The children, too, began to heal. Chloe told Linda one afternoon, "I don't hate my dad, I just wish he trusted us enough to tell the truth." Linda hugged her gently. "Sometimes adults think protecting their family means hiding their mistakes, but real protection comes from honesty. You're teaching him that now." Word of Gregory's secrets began to leak into Cedarbrook. Whispers spread about gambling, debt, and reckless decisions. Some neighbors reveled in the gossip, shaking their heads at the downfall of the once proud Hendersons. But others saw something else, a family facing its demons with raw honesty, and a neighbor who stood by them through it all. Slowly, the narrative shifted. The Hendersons weren't just falling apart. They were fighting to put themselves back together. And Linda was at the center of that transformation. The real revelation came weeks later, when the attorney discovered that one of Gregory's private loan contracts had been improperly filed. It meant a portion of his debt could be challenged, potentially reducing the Hendersons' burden by nearly half. It wasn't salvation, but it was hope. And hope, Linda reminded them, was the seed of resilience. Sandra wept when she heard the news. Gregory, humbled beyond words, managed only a quiet, "Thank you." But this time, he wasn't just thanking the lawyer. He was thanking Sandra for not giving up on him. He was thanking his children for enduring the storm. And he was thanking Linda for showing them the truth, even when it hurt. The Henderson home was still under threat. The future was still uncertain, but the family was no longer fractured by secrets. The revelation had cut deep, but it also cleared the way for healing. And in that fragile balance between despair and hope, between destruction and rebuilding, Linda's presence shone brighter than ever. For the first time in years, the Hendersons weren't just surviving. They were learning to fight together.